Less than a week ago, the Knicks came out on top of a double overtime opening night classic against one of their biggest competitors in the East, confirming they are poised to be a threat in the NBA landscape once again. After mixed results against a young Magic team, the Knicks faced their toughest test yet when the Philadelphia 76ers entered the world's most famous arena. Hello and welcome to the Putback with Ian Begley live. I'm Chris Williamson alongside SNY NBA insider Ian Begley. Joining us for this afternoon's broadcast is Fred Katz, who is the new Knicks beat reporter for The Athletic after covering the Wizards down in my hometown in D.C. And we're also pumped to have the always energetic, always fired up, probably got 9 cups of coffee in him, John Jastremski. JJ's podcast, New York, New York, is a huge hit, part of the Ringer family, but he's also a very familiar face to SNY and viewers of Geico Sports Night. And again, we're live on SNY's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages, as well as streaming on SNY.TV. As always, you can get involved in the comment section throughout this entire stream. But we're going to tip things off with the baseline. And Ian, to start the season for the Knicks has been 3 completely different games, a thrilling double OT battle with the Celtics in which the Knicks prevailed, a blowout win down in Orlando, then a disappointing loss 2 days later to that same Magic team at home. And you were at practice yesterday. What were your biggest takeaways from Tom Thibodeau and the players as far as what happened on Sunday?
Well, they were talking about what they saw on film, and I thought Derrick Rose put it really well. He said he didn't think that the Knicks respected their opponent going into Sunday because of the idea that they blew them out on Friday night. And to me, this game tonight is interesting because you have a veteran group, won a lot of games last year. So you would think that they would be able to fine-tune whatever they saw on tape after that Orlando game and come back and at least be very competitive tonight against Philadelphia. So if that doesn't happen, if they get blown out again, it's going to lead to more questions. But I think based on what they showed you last season, this game should at least be competitive tonight against Philadelphia.
Yeah, I'm absolutely expecting a very exciting game and one where the Knicks will be competitive all the way through. And Fred, you wrote an article for The Athletic this morning examining the Knicks' first 3 games. What is the energy? What is energy, I should say, was your first headline. Why was that such a big theme coming off Sunday's loss when they had only 12 fast break points against Orlando then and had 24 fast break points on Friday?
You know, they talked about it so much, and it wasn't just one guy, right? I mean, Julius Randle brought it up, and Tibbs brought it up, and Derrick Rose brought it up, and basically anybody you talked to after the game was talking about how they just didn't feel like they came out with enough energy. And after they waxed Orlando on Friday night, the Magic just came back and kind of returned the punch on Sunday when they came to New York. And I think energy can show in a lot of different ways. And one of the reasons I wanted to ask that question, what is energy, is because I didn't think the Knicks came out and necessarily weren't hustling. I didn't think that was the case against Orlando. You watch how they played. They were going after loose balls. They were playing hard on defense, but those extra moments that made the Knicks a really, really good defense last year, they weren't necessarily happen. I thought there were communication breakdowns for sure, especially around screens and stuff like that. And that's something I wanted to highlight in that story. And there were moments where they just kind of let guys get loose in these sorts of un-Knicksian ways that we're not used to seeing from Tibbs teams, which are normally so disciplined and so refined. And I don't think it's necessarily a long-term worry. I think it's most likely just a one-night thing, but it's something that really stood out to me from the Orlando loss.
Yeah, it's like when you have certain, like you're focused for most of the game but then there's just little parts where you let your man go or something, just that split second can make a big difference in how the game plays out. And JJ, the Knicks over under for wins was set at 42.5 entering the year. So how do you feel about that number, especially after watching the first 3 games this year?
Chris, I still feel pretty darn good about that number because the Knickerbockers are a team that gives you that sort of effort, that plays with that sort of tenacity that you need to have. And that's my thing always when I look at handicapping over-unders and season totals throughout an NBA season. I want teams who really, really care. I want teams who are going to bust their butt night in and night out throughout the regular season. And listen, I can't say that every single team throughout the association is going to do that. When you look at load management, you think about guys taking nights off, and it's obvious. I don't care what anybody tells you. It's obvious when you see a particular team and a couple of different particular players, dare I say, take those nights off. I don't think you'll get that with this Knicks group. That's why I'm curious to see how they respond. It's obviously a tough test against the Philadelphia 76ers, but this is a team that gave max effort last year. I don't expect that to change this year.
Yeah, I think they're going to come out firing, especially they want to prove that they can hang with the big dogs in the East. And once again, you can write your questions into the comment section, no matter what platform you're watching on, and we'll get to them throughout the show. But Ian, there seems to be like mixed impressions of Julius Randle's first 3 games of the season. What has been the vibe on his start to the year?
I thought one thing that was interesting that Tom Thibodeau said after that Sunday game, he said he didn't want to see players take any like personal issues into the game. I don't know who he was talking about, but if you put 2 and 2 together, Julius Randle, Wendell Carter, they had a little bit of a mix up late in the game on Friday. And then Randle seemed to be wanting to go at Wendell Carter on Sunday. I don't know if Tibbs was talking about Julius Randle, but I think you're seeing Randle assert himself in isolation, probably a little bit more so than he did last year over these first few games. Maybe some of that is just the starters getting used to one another. Remember, you have Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier a part of that group. So I think it's going to take, 15 to 20 games before they start to really develop a rhythm. But I think also, you saw Randle move the ball regularly last year, and it's happened a little bit less so far this season. But to me, not a huge concern at this point. It's so early in the season. We're 3 games in, 2 new starters. So I think you have to give it some time.
Absolutely. And Randle was only 2 of 10 from 3 on Sunday after shooting almost 36% there his first 2 games. And Fred, when we look at, another one of the key players for the Knicks, RJ Barrett, he spoke yesterday and admitted he's gotten off to a slow start again this year. He only scored 7 and 12 points in the 2 Magic matchups. What has he said about his performance, and what have you made of his start right now?
So, he's basically talked about it. It was funny. A reporter asked him yesterday about him getting off to a slow start. And this is his 3rd year in the league. And he just kind of said, I don't know why it keeps happening. This is 3 years in a row that this has happened now, where he's just gotten off to this slow start to begin the year. The same thing happened last year. The numbers ended up where kind of actually above where you would expect them to be. He shot 40 from 3, and I think he improved in a lot of different facets of the game. I don't think the Knicks are worried about him with the slow shooting start. I actually think his defense has taken a really nice step in the right direction. He's guarded Jason Tatum. He guarded Jaylen Brown for a little bit during that Boston game. He's had some really, really tough defensive assignments. I think he's been more physical defensively than you saw last year. He's done a good job, chasing guys around the court. I think if you're looking for a positive with RJ Barrett, that's a really good way to do it. Just figure he looked really comfortable in the preseason. He was taking 6 threes a game, which is a really nice step in the right direction as well there. If that translates into the regular season, it's only been 3 games. If that starts to translate into the games that matter, you match that with good defense, that's another step in the right direction for RJ Barrett on the whole for the whole year.
Yeah, one thing about RJ, Chris, it's like the idea that now you have Kemba Walker, you have Julius Randle, and you wonder how that impacts him on the offensive end. Obviously, he was the clear-cut number 2 for this team last year. And now you add Walker, and obviously Kemba hasn't played to the level that I think Knicks fans expected so far on the whole. But let's say Kemba gets going, which I think he will. Where does that leave RJ on the offensive end? I think you hit it on the head on defense. He's stronger, he's bigger, he's faster, and that's going to help him on that end. And also I want to say, you got to subscribe to The Athletic. You got to read Fred Katz every day because he's doing a great job so far on the Knicks. Not to get too personal, he also got a haircut yesterday. He looks really sharp. So go ahead and subscribe to The Athletic. Get it.
I gotta get that Begley money so I can afford nice paintings of the Empire State Building. That's really what's got to happen.
One can only dream. One can dream. But looking at tonight, RJ Barrett's over and under 4 points is set at 14.5. Do you like the over here?
Well, first, I like the fresh cut. I got one myself. It's needed. And sometimes when the burns are getting out of control, like mine, you got to do what you got to do. But as far as that total, listen, I'm all over the over tonight. I know RJ Barrett's gotten off to a slow start this year, but I think that talk and that chatter and now having a day in practice, I think you're going to see the Knicks maybe stress and almost in a way force feed the ball to RJ Barrett to try to get him out of that funk, to try to get him going. They're going to need big-time wing play out of their wing players if they're going to beat the Philadelphia 76ers tonight. And I just have a feeling you're going to get a big bounce-back effort from Barrett. Now, I could be wrong on this, but I see that total exactly where it's at. And I think we're looking at a total that's 18, 19 points for RJ Barrett. So I'm going over here.
All right. Got a lot of confidence in
Nice.
Mr. RJ Barrett. And we mentioned the load management before, Ian. Some people are already reacting or overreacting to that a bit. Julio Torres on YouTube is asking, is Thibs going to use the bench? He keeps running these guys out there to run out of gas.
You know what? It's interesting because we asked Thibodeau about that earlier this month, and he talked about the way you can use guys in practice between games and how, people don't really see that, obviously, but that impacts how fresh they are for that next game. So he was saying, let's say you play somebody 38 minutes, where he is after that game, and what he needs to do in practice to be fresh for the following game. So I think let's hold off on the minutes discussion at the moment. It's early in the season. If we're talking in March and guys are dragging and they're up at the top of the list for minutes played again, then we can have that conversation. But I think let's see how Tom Thibodeau practices these guys in between games, and let's see if that helps, because I think that's something that isn't really talked about a lot when you talk about the minutes totals.
Yeah, and it should be, because you take that day off, or you let the star player, rest a little bit in practice, and then they have a lot more energy to go for the game. But, between the end of the show, people, in tip-off tonight at the Garden, be sure to check out SNY.TV for tremendous coverage of the New York Knicks. Ian has the team's analysis of what went wrong against the Magic, while SNY contributor David Würzberger takes a deep dive into Randle's early season shooting woes. And let's talk about the new players now. Through the first 3 games, it seems like the way Evan Fournier goes, the way the Knicks offense goes. He had 32 points against Boston, including 12 in overtime, then 18 in the Magic win, but only 8 in the Magic loss, going just 2 of 7 from long distance. How much of a difference is there in the New York offense with Evan a part of it?
Yeah, it's certainly a big difference because they want to shoot more threes. Evan Fournier allows them to do that. Looking back at Sunday, I wonder just how much of it was the Knicks missing looks that they had made more often in the first 2 games. Tom Thibodeau said that after he took a look at the film on Sunday and Monday, he thought that most of the looks that they missed were quality looks. So, a guy like Fournier, you would think that more often than not, he's going to knock those down. And maybe it was a case of too many Knicks just being cold on the same night. But certainly Evan Fournier allows them to stretch the floor. He also gives them someone else who can create off the dribble, which is what they were looking for in the offseason. Obviously, you lose something on defense when you sub Fournier for Reggie Bullock, but offensively, he's a big part of what's going to work or not work for the Knicks this year.
And Evan only played 7 minutes against Philly before leaving with back spasm. So you wonder, this last year, New Year's Eve, you wonder if there's a little extra motivation tonight for him. And on the other side, Fred, Kemba Walker has gotten off to a quiet start, as Ian mentioned, scoring between 10 to 11 points a game, and has ended up in the minus each night. And Matt now asked, the offense is a lot more positive in netting more ball movement with Rose as the PG over Kemba. Is that a cause of concern? Will Rose start more? And what do you make of Kemba overall?
I'm waiting to develop the opinion on Kemba, just because I think it hasn't been enough games. He missed so much time last year. He didn't play in any back-to-back, or I should say he didn't play in both halves of any back-to-backs. And even when he did play, he didn't look like the Kemba Walker that we've come to know, because he was fighting through that knee injury for basically the entire season. And I think there's still some carryover from that knee. I think it's very clear. One thing that really stood out to me in that Orlando game on Sunday was he made kind of a run-of-the-mill layup in the third quarter. And I was like, my goodness, that is the only layup he's made as a Knick so far. He just, part of the reason they got him was for that off-the-dribble creation, that ability to be able to create buckets for himself and for teammates. And he hasn't really done that off the dribble, at least inside the three-point line. I'm not concerned yet. It's been 3 games. There are a million reasons why this could be happening. He could be not comfortable yet. He could be just kind of easing in with teammates. Tibbs mentioned something at the beginning of the year that he thought that he and Fournier were both being a little bit too unselfish, just trying not to step on new teammates' toes. And that's obviously something that could be in play as well. I mean, there are a million other possibilities as to why it could be happening. It could just be a cold streak for all we know, or him getting comfortable with plays and sets and actions that he hasn't been used to in his entire career because everything's new. So I'm not concerned yet, but I do think that it's something to monitor because we've seen it for 3 games, and it's similar to stuff that we saw with him in Boston last year. And that's obviously something worth keeping an eye on moving forward.
And maybe he hits a hot streak tonight against the 76ers. I mean, his career high 60-point game came in November 17th of 2018 against the 76ers. And JJ, John Talento is asking, which point guard, in your opinion, should be closing games? And obviously, it's still very early, but Walker or Rose at this point?
Yeah, I think it's too early to tell to have a definitive answer to that question. But at this moment in time, it's Derrick Rose, because he's been here. He knows the fabric of what a lot of these particular guys bring to the table. And if you go back to the end of last year and you go back to the postseason, Derrick Rose was a guy you wanted the ball in his hand. So Kemba trying to get his feet wet, Kemba trying to get physically right. Yeah, I would much rather see Derrick Rose at the end of these games, but that could change. Listen, my answer at the end of October could be drastically different than what I'm giving you in March and April when this team is playing in the postseason. So definitely keep that in mind.
And please keep the questions coming wherever you are watching. Rick Pennington asks or says, everyone's white walls is a bit depressing. Then he put a bunch of laughing faces.
We're working on it. We're running.
I know. Yeah, we're just moving in. You know what I'm saying? I'm working on it. You're working on it. It's a struggle bus right now for a lot of us besides Ian, who's got a beautiful backdrop. But it's time for a new segment called Rose Garden, where Ian gives his roses to a player or a topic that may or may not be getting as much love as it should, or maybe just something we haven't talked about yet. Ian, what's on your mind right now?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, roses to my wife. I need to give her to her. She's not getting her enough. So, honey, I hope you're watching. But I think when you look at this team top to bottom, the whole roster, I think one thing you have to keep an eye on moving forward is Emmanuel Quickley and his role, where it's going to be. But I think just in terms of his professionalism, you got to give him some roses, because he's not going to complain about minutes. He's not going to complain about his role at all. He's going to take everything in stride, and he's going to try to perform on the court when you call his number. But so his minutes, I'm going to keep an eye on for a long stretch this season. But I do think that the idea that he's fully bought in and he's not going to be griping or complaining about minutes kind of speaks to this Knicks team in general, where everybody seems to have fallen in line behind Julius Randle and behind Tom Thibodeau, rowing in the same direction. So I think quickly you have to give him some credit for the way he's handled it so far.
Yeah, and I just want to let you know, Ian, that our producer, Mike Robinson, is going to clip that shout out to your wife. So you'll make sure you have it on record and you can send it to her, if she's not watching.
Appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, Mike's always holding it down for us. And Fred, obviously the main difference between last year's Knicks and what we've seen so far has been the three-point shooting. And The Athletic, you pointed out this stat, 50.2% of the Knicks field goal attempts have come from three, which would be the second highest three-point attempt rate in NBA history. Only 3 games in, Fred. Is this sustainable, man?
50% of them? Probably not, because 2/3 of those 3 games came against the Orlando Magic, who, especially in Orlando, did not seem particularly interested in guarding the 3-point line. So I'll say this level, no, probably not. But I do think they're going to shoot a lot of threes this year. I think they're going to shoot a ton of threes this year. I totally believe they have put an emphasis on this from the very beginning. From the start of the summer, Tom Thibodeau was telling all of his players, we are going to shoot more threes this year. We are going to have a change of offensive identity. And they were scheming up different ways to try to see how they could create them. I don't think they want to just take threes for the sake of threes. But if you look at the way that they, put together this roster, they have guys who can shoot them. And I think if they can get organic, standstill, catch and shoot threes, if they can get Kemba shooting them off the dribble, I think they feel really good about that. Randle shooting his step backs, I think they feel good about those too. And you just look around the roster outside of the centers, the Mitchell Robinson and Nerlens Noel, like even Taj Gibson was taking them in the preseason. Yeah. Like everyone seems to feel totally comfortable. If you're open, put them up. And this is the new era of the NBA, right? Where if you're a 1 through 4, you have to take them. And if you're a 5, if you don't take them, you'll start practicing them within the next 5 years, because you'll have to take them by the time you retire. Like that's just the way the league is going. I think the Knicks are recognizing that. I think they're trying to figure out ways to take not any 3, but good threes. And I would not be surprised if they were like in the top, third of the league in attempts by the end of the year.
Yeah, and if they can make 40% of them, that would be amazing. Just make them a much more dynamic team. And after tonight's game, be sure to watch Geico Sports Night starting at 11 p.m. on SNY. There will be plenty of highlights and reaction after the game. Plus, Ian will join the show live from the Garden. So for the best straight-up Knicks coverage, be sure to watch Geico Sports Night tonight and every night starting at 11. We got a couple bets for JJ. Let's get some more better takes here from you. Looking at tonight's game and the league as a whole, many a recreational bettor says you can't bet the NBA. What would you say to that bettor? And is there a particular strategy that you use?
Yeah, I think it comes down to motivation. I know that sounds rather simplistic, and I know that sounds rather obvious, but when I have a team second night of a back-to-back, that's always a cause for concern. When I have a team that's in the middle of a long road trip, let's say, that's going to be cause for concern. When I'm monitoring injuries, kind of like one we have going on with Joel Embiid tonight, that's always going to bring cause for concern. Listen, daily NBA, daily MLB, daily any sort of sports betting is a grind, Chris. It's a grind. But if you put your research in and you put your homework in and you kind of have a comfort level for what you like and what you don't, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes you can have a little luck and have some success.
Yeah, and you just hope that you have more W's than L's at the end of the day. But looking at the props for this game, what's one bet you'd like to take for either side tonight?
All right, I'm going to give you a Philadelphia 76er that I'm all over. Tobias Harris. I see Tobias Harris. He's a guy I have circled because the uncertainty of whether or not Joel Embiid will play, I think he probably will, but even if he doesn't, do they ease up on the minutes, let's say? Tobias Harris is, to me, a guy who can go and get it from a rebounding perspective, from a scoring perspective. So there are a lot of these same game parlays where maybe you want to get cute and creative. I'm going over points for Tobias Harris, but I like over rebounds for Tobias Harris that much more. I think he has double-double written all over him tonight, gets after it. So the local boy, I think, is going to want to put on a show at Madison Square Garden.
Hey, we'll love to see it. Hopefully, though, the Knicks will, come out on top. But besides this New York podcast with the Ringer, you can get JJ's football picks every Sunday, bright and early at 11:30 a.m. on Place Your Bets on SNY. And Ian, Matt Nell Kaplan is asking, Quentin Grimes has shown great perimeter defense and a solid jump shot. Will Tibbs utilize him more, or will he become another Frank, seeing a minute a week?
Yeah, I think over, his rookie contract, I'm sure we will see more of Quentin Grimes. I think he can take that to the bank because Tom Thibodeau has kind of singled him out every time he's talked about the younger Knicks. And you saw Grimes in the preseason be a part of a closing lineup that featured Randle at center, Toppin at the 4, and he really made it work on defense for that lineup. So I don't think you're going to see regular minutes for Grimes this season unless there's an injury. But I do think, big picture, the Knicks do have plans for Quentin Grimes. They like where he is right now. They like where he's going. And I also think that JJ is on a bit of a hot streak. So anybody who is interested, I think you got to listen to JJ when he's talking about laying down bets.
I hope so. From your lips to God's ears, Ian Begley, please.
So when we talk about the big men, Fred, Mitchell Robinson was very critical of his own defense after Sunday's game, and you explored some film to really decipher his performance. What did you see there from Mitch?
Overall, I thought he was pretty good. I mean, he made an impact around the rim like he always does. The energy was there. By his own admission, his conditioning just is not there right now. And that's not a surprise. I mean, he had foot surgery in April, which shut him down for months and months. He wasn't really able to play at all over the summer. And when you have foot surgery, it prevents you from running. So it just makes it really, really hard to be able to stay just kind of in that sort of cardio that you need to be able to play an NBA game for 35 minutes. So he ended up building up his own body and he added bulk. And, one thing that Tom Thibodeau added was that as we see him play throughout the year, you're going to see some of that weight come off of him because it's not all bulk. Some of it is, let's call it a casualty of the foot, right? It's just him adding it by having to sit down for an extended period of time. So I think that shows in moments, and it kind of comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is just energy. I mean, that conditioning is a big part of energy, right? And so I think there are moments where he wasn't necessarily in the right place defensively, where maybe he was supposed to help, and either he recognized it late or somebody communicated to him late, and he wasn't necessarily in the right spot. There were a couple of block chasing moments, I thought, but I think overall the defense looks pretty good. What's going to be a really interesting test for him is if Joel Embiid does play tonight, I mean, that's it, because that is the reason why he put on the bulk, right? For Joel Embiid. If you have to play the 76ers in a 7-game series, that is the guy you have to make as uncomfortable as possible. And in order to make him uncomfortable, you just have to kind of make sure that you don't get shoved out of the way all the time by just the most massive and skilled dude in the entire league. And so just seeing how he does tonight, I mean, I would really love to see Embiid play, because it's going to be fascinating to see how the Knicks as a team guard him.
Yeah.
But I'm so interested to see how Robinson in particular is just able to fight him with this body that he says has given him a lot more, strength.
Right. And that leads into my next question for you, Ian. With Mitch going up possibly against Joel Embiid tonight, how much will we learn about him against one of the premier players in all of NBA?
Yeah, I think you'll definitely be able to take something away from it. But with Robinson, Fred mentioned the conditioning isn't all the way there yet. So I think when we're in January, we're in February, we're in March, and that conditioning is where the Knicks want it to be, where Robinson wants it to be. I think that's where you can more fully judge the young center. And what's interesting to me is, last year before Mitchell Robinson got hurt, the Knicks were looking at the last few weeks of the season as an opportunity to kind of evaluate Robinson as a starting center. And obviously Robinson now is going to be an unrestricted free agent this summer unless the Knicks offer him an extension during the season. So to me, the Knicks are looking at this as a long period of evaluation for Mitchell Robinson. I would assume that he's more likely to hit unrestricted free agency than to get an extension. But if he starts to play well, gets back in shape, and really takes a leap for the Knicks, I could see them talking extension with him at some point during the season.
Yeah, and obviously, that would be a good thing if he's able to really explode and show his true potential right now as he does get his conditioning back. Obviously, that's something very important for Coach Tom Thibodeau. But JJ, Joel Embiid is, as we said, he's questionable for tonight's game. We don't know if he's going to play. He's averaging 21 points to start the season, but his over-under for total points tonight is set at 26.5. You like the over or the under here?
I like the under, and I understand the Knicks right now are dealing with some front court issues. The idea of getting Mitchell Robinson's stamina up, not having a guy like Nerlens Noel. But I just get the sense for Philadelphia, with the way last year finished up, with Joel Embiid being as hobbled as he was, if indeed he's going to play tonight, I think they're going to take it easy on his minutes. That's just my personal take on the matter. And that means in order to hit a prop total that's going to be that high, where I guarantee you're going to have most bettors coming in on the over tonight, they're going to look at Embiid, Madison Square Garden, going to look to put on a show against the New York Knickerbockers. I go the other way. I also get the sense the Knicks are going to put all their efforts and all their energy into trying to slow down the big fella. So I'm going to go against the grain here. I think Knicks fans are going to like to hear this. If I'm playing the prop total, if, of course, Joel Embiid gives it a go, I like the under.
All right. We'll see how it all shakes out. But as I mentioned before, friend of the putback, Ian, Nerlens Noel is 50-50 to make his season debut tonight, according to Tom Thibodeau. And Sam Holt wants to know if there's an update on Nerlens.
No update right now. He was listed as questionable, which means 50-50. And I think that with Nerlens Noel, I wouldn't be surprised if he gave it another game to rest. It's really mysterious what this injury is. Early on in the preseason, the talk was that he would be back soon, and it wasn't a major thing. And I think he suffered a setback at some point, and it's the knee and it's the hamstring. And I really think that if he does go tonight, the minutes will be limited, but he can obviously help them out with Joel Embiid. But I wouldn't be surprised if they took a cautious approach here and gave him one more night.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. You never want to rush a guy like Nerlens back, even though it would be great to have him. He did average 2.2 blocks per game last year, which ranked third in the NBA. Make sure you send your questions on whatever platform you're on, and we'll try to get to all of them as soon as possible. And Fred Andrews asking, offense isn't the problem. Our backcourt defense is the problem. And Fred, we asked Ian about this last week. Where do you see the offense-defense balance with the Knicks this year, especially looking at the additions of Fournier and Walker?
Yeah, I mean, the backcourt defense is not great. I mean, I think Walker is especially struggled guarding, opposing ball handlers. I think there's no question about that. I think Fournier has been okay in that aspect. I think there's a really big reliance on RJ Barrett, to be honest. I mean, look, when you let Reggie Bullock go and you bring in Fournier, you're basically saying, okay, The problem on offense last year was that all of the offense was coming from a singular source, right? It was basically coming from saying, hey, Julius Randle, go do stuff, create things for yourself and for everybody else. And then when the Hawks loaded up on him in that first round playoff series, there just weren't other options. There wasn't enough diversity within that attack. And so the Knicks went stagnant and it became a huge problem for them. And they lost that series in 5. And Fournier gives them somebody else who can attack closeouts, do stuff off the dribble and be able to kind of be a release valve. And Kemba Walker, ideally is able to do that as well. And defensively, I think kind of what it turns to is RJ Barrett going to be really, really good? Is he going to be able to basically take another step on offense while also taking over that Reggie Bullock role defensively? So far, I think we're seeing him do a pretty good job of that. I don't know if the Knicks are going to get back to 4th in defense again, where they were 4th in points allowed per possession last season. I don't know if they're going to get to that point, but I think a really good way to be able to at least maintain in the top 10 during the regular season is just to have really good communication, play on a string, all the basic basketball concepts, be able to help, be able to rotate well, play as a team, that kind of stuff. Just be the kind of disciplined defense that Tom Thibodeau teams tend to be. And so I still think that's going to be a solid defense, and they have really, really good rim protection, especially when Nerlens Noel is healthy. So I think there's still going to be a pretty formidable defense, but there's no question the backcourt defense is not as great as it was. And I think that's also part of the reason why we've seen Derrick Rose close games over Kemba Walker early in the year. I think he's just a little bit stauncher in that role.
Yeah, for sure. And Ian, when it comes to, Ben Simmons, if I'm the Knicks, Peter Butter and NJ Nelly is saying defensively, they fell short and offensively played too freely, not incorporating the team collective. Rick points out that Simmons works here, but questions who the Knicks would have to give up. So how do we see the Ben Simmons scenario in Philadelphia playing out?
Well, Daryl Morey made it clear. He's looking for a star and he's not going to settle. I think that was a tactical message that he sent out because he hasn't gotten that star on the table that he's looking for. And the interesting thing to me is I know there are at least 2 lead guards had wanted to play in Philadelphia, but they wanted to play with Ben Simmons in Philadelphia. So the idea of a trade to Philadelphia, Ben Simmons not being on the roster after that trade, wasn't that appealing to them. But Morey's in a tough spot and Ben Simmons is in a tough spot. It's a staring contest right now. I think what it's going to come down to is Daryl Morey's probably going to have to settle for something less than an elite player in return for Ben Simmons. And they're just going to have to part ways because you can't wait out 4 years of Ben Simmons' contract, which is also Joel Embiid's prime in having a staring contest with Ben Simmons. You have to make a move, in my opinion, during this season if you are serious about trying to contend for a title in Philadelphia.
Right, because if they draw this thing out, the chances of Philadelphia winning a title, if they don't do anything with Ben Simmons, is definitely it's going to go down tremendously. And JJ, the Knicks, going back to the game tonight, the Knicks are 1.5-point favorites over the Sixers. Can the Knicks win? Can they cover? What's your pick here?
Chris, earlier in the day, full disclosure, I was leaning towards the Philadelphia 76ers. But then you see this report regarding Joel Embiid. And in some places, this line has actually gotten jacked up to 2.5. So I always look at those numbers. Sometimes it ends up being a blessing. Other times it ends up being a curse. But you don't have a ton of public action on the Knicks. It's kind of split. And that line, at least some places, has gotten to 2.5. That leads me to believe it's going to be a happy night at Madison Square Garden. And come on, I couldn't come on the show and pick against the Knicks on my debut. I mean, I want to be invited back. So easy call. I'm taking the Knicks tonight.
You're always welcome back, JJ. Always bringing that energy. But, Fred, from someone who's watched the Knicks from the outside before the season, what is the significance of the Knicks being favored over a top team like the Sixers tonight?
Well, it's a change. I mean, it's so funny coming into the beat at this point because I feel like, and I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up in New York, so I'm fully familiar with the fan base. One of my friends told me the other day that me getting this job is the best thing that ever happened to him. So I'm fully aware of how fanatic this fan base can be. I feel like the start of this Knicks season has got to be the most excited the fan base has been since at least 2014 or 2013, I should say, following that 54 win season when they lost to the Pacers. I mean, I don't think there's been this kind of energy in a while with people screaming bing bong outside the arena to begin a year for a very long time, which is energy that Ian endorses, but not language. I think that's just another sign of kind of the respect the Knicks are getting now as part of this turnaround, right?
Yeah, it surely is. The way the crowd responded after that win outside of Madison Square Garden was something unlike I've ever seen for a season opening win. It's just mind-boggling. But Ian, lastly, the Knicks will defeat the 76ers tonight if what?
If you get Mitchell Robinson and Nerlens Noel back, I should say, and they both use all 6 of their fouls on Joel Embiid.
All right, concise and short. I love it. Straight to the point. And that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Putback with Ian Begley. Our thanks to Fred Katz. Be sure to follow his insight in reporting all season long through The Athletic. And of course, thanks to Jastremski. Listen to him on his New York podcast and throughout SNY programming. We are back to our classic format next Wednesday at 4 with Ian, myself, and a special guest. We'll break down what happens over the next week and look ahead to next Friday against the Milwaukee Bucks. For Ian Begley, I'm Chris Williamson. Enjoy the Knicks and Sixers, and we will see you next week.